Well, good evening, everybody. It's all very polished so far. Preparation slides and little headers up there for you. I've just come along to talk to you about some of my holiday snaps. So hopefully that's going to work for you. I grew up just down the road in Brighton. My introduction to the outdoors really came from scouting. I got involved in kayaking, walking on downs, climbing locally at Harrison's Rocks on the sandstone outcrops that we've got here in Sussex and Kent. And that sort of developed, and the D.O.V. that you're involved with now wasn't really the thing then. It was just sort of taking off. But I got involved in the Scout program, which worked much along the same lines as the D.O.V. program, and it's just a great introduction for people into the outdoors and into community and all the other projects that come up with the D.O.V. It's the same through the Scouting program. Couldn't recommend it enough. From the local climbing and walking, we then sort of develop a little bit further, going a little bit further afield. These pictures are down in Brecon. A colleague there was probably in one or other of these. And you'll see with your D.O.V. expeditions that you're probably going to go down that way when you come to do your Silver Award, maybe, get down to Brecon. It's a bit more adventurous and challenging scenery than what we have up here in Sussex. But what you want to be doing when you start looking at your goal is start opening up and realizing that you can control where these expeditions are going to take you, and don't be limited. Try and use your imagination. These pictures are down in Italy, what they call the Southern Alps, down in Liguria. Beautiful, much more rugged landscape. A friend of mine who lives down that way, he shadows D.O.V. gold expeditions down in that terrain. And it's a great introduction there to going off and climbing in more rugged mountains, climbing up on ice, and then into the Alps itself. So you may find yourselves just building up your interest from there and getting on into more alpine and more rugged terrain. During my youth, I used to read quite a lot about climbing expeditions. It did seem to sort of a young lad from a comprehensive in Brighton that all these books are written by Chris Bonington and the likes, and they've sort of rather more privileged background than perhaps where we've come from. But and these things seem a little bit out of our reach. There was a wonderful book by a couple of Americans called Dick Bass and Frank Wells, who wrote a book called The Seven Summits, which was a challenge to climb the highest peak on each of the 7 continents. And it was just such unbelievable adventure and experience that you couldn't possibly think that this was anything that you would be able to do. But my background through scouting, the introduction into the outdoors, and the opportunities that led to, then took me off onto other expeditions. These are down in the Alps, near the Mer de Glace, near Mont Blanc on the board here, you'll see. And you start to build up this wealth of experience, and then you meet people along the way who've been on other expeditions, and suddenly you realize that the world has got a lot smaller, and these places are a lot more achievable to ordinary people. And with the experience and the knowledge that you build up, perhaps you'll get invited, you'll get an opportunity to go and join these greater expeditions. Here we see Di there, we were just speaking earlier, descending down onto the Mer de Glace through these ladder systems and down onto the glacier proper. A little bit out of the D.O.V. remit, but nothing that you should be scared of, and something that perhaps you can see your D.O.V. experience is leading you on to. No reason why not at all. And then from there, the other sort of pictures we've brought along. Here we can see some crevasse work, all of the experiences, the climbing, the rope work, and the team building that goes into your expeditions could be leading you on to these things as well. I was very fortunate to have a team of people around me who were equally interested to go off onto these expeditions. Again, in the Alps here. Down at Gran Paradiso, but oh, my ribs are dry. Yeah. I say all of these little expeditions that you go on will build up the experience to open up these great expeditions. With Di, we saw those pictures earlier from Mount Elbrus, the highest peak in Europe. We were down there because it just fitted in with our program, and opportunity arose to come down there. And one of the people we were climbing with, who we shared a rope with, he had all sorts of trouble tying knots. He couldn't tie his harness on properly. And everyone sat around with their bragging rights on where they'd been on previous expeditions. And he turned around and told us that he'd climbed Everest the year before. And we were quite staggered by this. But it suddenly realized that these mountains were achievable to ordinary climbers. And I think I'm struggling with my slides here, sorry. Sorry? No, that's all right. So from there, we'd met up with people who had climbed in the greater ranges, and then I then went on a commercial trip to climb a mountain called Denali. You may know it as Mount McKinley, the highest peak in Alaska. And from there, I met up with an American mountaineering guide, a chap called Scott Woolhams, who was putting together a trip to go to Everest. I think we roll on for a minute. Yeah. Yeah. So Everest, who can believe that you're going to get the opportunity to go and climb Mount Everest? It's something I'd read about as a child. You dreamed about from these books and these expeditions from the great climbers that you'd read. And yet, here we are. We've been invited by an American expedition leader to join his trip to climb Everest. What you have to remember is only 1 in 20 people who go to climb the mountain actually get to the top. So it's about enjoying the experience. You can't just be waiting for that moment when you're on the top of the mountain. You need to be able to enjoy the trek and the trail up through the mountains, through the Khumbu region, experience the local culture. This is a place called Namche Bazaar. It's the main trading post between Tibet and Nepal. The trade used to come over the mountains through the passes into Namche Bazaar. And it's now the focus for the treks that go into the mountains. You move up above here and you come onto a section. I've brought a map that's along at the back of the hall there, and on the section of the map there it just says tombstones. And this is a very steep incline on the trail, and on either side of the trail as you're coming up are a series of these rock cairns, and they're all dedicated to climbers who've died up on the mountains. So it's a very serious undertaking. That one was dedicated to a young British climber called Michael Matthews. And when we'd been on an expedition the year before in South America, we'd actually met him and his father as they were preparing for their Everest expedition. And unfortunately, when they were high on the mountain, he summited the mountain. At the time, he was the youngest British climber to summit Mount Everest. But they had a terrible mix-up with the oxygen cylinders. I've bought an oxygen cylinder for you to fill, and they have these things called a regulator, like the divers use. And the cylinders and the regulators didn't match, and they ended up dying on the mountain. There was a terrible incident over it all. But it brings home to you the seriousness of any of these expeditions. But with the right training and with the right background, hopefully you can minimize these risks. There's risks in everything we do, and risks shouldn't put you off from taking part and joining in these expeditions. Once we've come up to Everest Base Camp, this sort of mythical area we've read about, it's a sort of resting area before we get up onto the mountain proper. And above Everest Base Camp, there's a very steep and dangerous, heavily crevassed section of glacier called the Khumbu Icefall. And this was where the 53 expedition, when they first climbed Everest, it was the big breakthrough in climbing the mountain. And all of the earlier expeditions, the Mallory and Irvins from the 20s, had all concentrated on the Tibetan side. But the breakthrough came in finding this Khumbu Icefall, this steep, heavily crevassed section. You can see here crossing some of these crevasses using these just aluminium ladders that have been tied together and thrown out over some of the crevasses. Very good for the concentration, this. You can practice this at home. But moving up onto the top of the icefall, you get these wonderful landscapes. The icescapes just change every day as you come through here. You need to be in here first thing in the morning when it's freezing cold so that the ice is at its most stable. The sun gets onto it and it starts to melt, and slowly through the day some of these structures give way and the ice starts to move downhill. So it's a very dangerous place to be, but it's part of climbing the mountain. You need to establish camps up on the mountain, and all this training, all these expeditions you've done in the past will build up, and this is where you draw on your reserves of energy and experience to spend such a long time on climbing the mountain. Coming up onto the higher camps on the mountain, we'd come up here to 7,000 meters, Camp 3 on the mountain. It was a new altitude record for myself. I'd not been as high as that before. Above this, we were going to start using supplementary oxygen, so another new experience using these oxygen cylinders. You're used to climbing and all the climbing gear and harnesses and the ropes, but now you've got hoses and face masks and everything else to coordinate as well. And you can see these jet stream winds on the top of the mountain, blowing the ice crystals from the summit of the mountain off into the distance. A terribly sort of dangerous place to be. You can see how the tents are sliced into the ice. We had to cut ledges into the ice to pitch the tents on, and then lash the tents down into the ice using ice anchors and snow screws. And we experienced the worst night under canvas I've ever had here at Camp 3 on the mountain. We had 100-mile-an-hour winds come through, minus 40 degrees outside of the tent. Terrifying experience. And you knew full well that if the tents had collapsed and you'd had to retreat, it would have been just such a dangerous place to retreat down the glacier from. But perseverance, hard work, bit of luck. Eventually we come to move up from Camp 3 into Camp 4, the South Col, which is this saddle that sits between the summit of Everest and Lhotse, its neighbour. And it's at 8,000 meters, and that's what they call the death zone. There's various books that refer to the death zone, and this is this magical area where your body can't acclimatize anymore. And now to move above 8,000 meters, you're getting into very dangerous territory. The idea is to be at this area for the minimum amount of time. So we're moving up on this last couple of rock sections to take you into this Camp 4. And you can see now, along with all of our usual climbing gear, I've brought along the big down suit that I'm wearing there in second place. And you've got a climbing harness, an ice axe, which I've brought along, you can see. Your hat on, you've got your ski goggles, your rucksack full of all your equipment, and a couple of oxygen cylinders as well now. And this is the South Col. This is this sort of last takeoff place to gain onto the ridge of Everest, up onto the southeast ridge. A very dangerous place to be. The idea is to be here for the minimum amount of time possible. But in the year I was there, the winds were blowing, the storms wouldn't move off from the summit, and we were trapped in the South Col. The idea was we would rest one day and head off that night for the summit, and the wind was bad and nobody left, and we sat there for the next day trying to relax as best you could in this thin atmosphere, using up our oxygen supplies, using up our food supplies. We sat there for another day, and eventually we went off to try and record a high point on the mountain. And we ended up coming up through onto the south summit of the mountain, and then finally climbing down into a little col and a little saddle before you go up onto the last rock step, the Hillary Step, which leads you up onto the top of Everest. And friends of mine had to turn round at the South Col, 200 feet, vertical feet below the summit of Everest. But for them, they knew that the last bit, the climbing down, sitting and waiting to climb the Hillary Step, was going to be such a dangerous thing to do. And this is where your wealth of experience that you've built up, making that decision. Imagine being in the position where you're 200 foot from the summit of Everest and you have to decide it's too dangerous to carry on, I'm going to turn around. But myself and Scott, we sat in the Hillary Step for 40 minutes in minus 40 degrees. The clouds all coming around us, and we finally made our way onto the summit. And this is a picture of me there holding, folded up inside my suit. To be on the top with me there is my mother and my brothers and sister. who've supported me and encouraged me in the expeditions that I've done, and the other activities that I've been fortunate enough to take part in. But this is the summit of Everest. Your expedition may not take you to the summit of Everest. Your expedition might not be a successful one, but it will be an experience. And that's the important thing. You must draw from all these experiences. And if you have the opportunity to go on these expeditions, take them. Because, well, it might be your summit of Everest. So, thank you very much. Guys,